Good afternoon, Anuja ma'am. How are you? I'm not able to hear you. I couldn't hear you. Good afternoon, Dr. Thomas.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Okay. Golda ma'am.
Now am I audible, Shanti?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Felix.
So Thomas, sir, your audio is fine. Can you check it, sir?
Shanti,
Yes,
it's fine,
fine.
right? I'm audible as of now.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, fine. Yeah, good. Golda ma'am. I'll just inform her.
Yes, Ankita.
Okay, ma'am. I just wanted to ensure whether your audio is fine.
Yeah, no audio is fine. Yeah, it was not on, so just.
All right. Okay. Kindly have the technical session trees list with you, and then you can start.
Good afternoon, Anuja ma'am. Nice to see you after a long time.
Golda ma'am, I think you can introduce the co-chair, and then co-chair can introduce the chair, and we can start the session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anju, ma'am, you are not audible, ma'am. You are not audible, ma'am.
Sorry, everyone. I think Golda ma'am has some problem. I'll just introduce our co-chair. Our co-chair for this session is Dr. Thomas Felix. He joined Tamil Nadu National Law University in July 2020. He is the Assistant Professor of Economics here at TNNLU. He is presently handling Economics 1 and Economics 2, and he has also completed his BSc Agri from Thandai Rover Institute of Agriculture and Rural Development, Perambalur in 2013, and MSc Agri with a specialization of Agricultural Economics from Agricultural College and Research Institute, Madurai in 2015. And he did his PhD in Economics from Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, Coimbatore in 2018. He got his UGC MANF fellowship for his doctoral program. Also, he got ICSSR postdoctoral fellowship in 2019. So after his doctoral program, he worked as a research associate in MIDAS, Madras Institute of Development Studies in Chennai for 1 year. Before joining TNNLU, Dr. Thomas Felix was engaged as a postdoctoral fellow in Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, Coimbatore. He has also cleared his ASRB NET, UGC NET, and TN SLET. He has published almost 11 research articles in reputed journals. He has also presented more than 20 papers in national and international conferences and participated in 6 national workshops. Further, he has an extensive knowledge in handling software like Stata, SPSS, and all. And his area of interest is in agricultural economics, natural resources economics, environmental economics, and international trade and marketing. And I must say, he's one of the most humble colleagues of mine, and he's very, very resourceful person. He might be very humble, but he'll not show up that he's very, very resourceful, but he is one of the resourceful colleagues of ours. Thank you so much, Dr. Felix, for immediately accepting my request. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Shanti ma'am. Thank you for your kind words. Myself, Dr. K. Thomas Felix, Assistant Professor Economics, TNLU. So I just want to welcome our chairperson. Okay. So I'm the co-chair for this session. So I'm so pleased to be with you for this afternoon, and it will be a privilege for me to introduce our chairperson, Dr. Anuja S. Dr. Anuja is working as an associate professor of law in Ramaya College of Law, Bangalore. She did her LLB and LLM in Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala. She got her doctoral degree from Cochin University of Science and Technology, Kerala. She did her PhD research on the topic of rights of women against domestic violence, the law and emerging challenges. She practiced as an advocate for 5 years since 2000 at high courts and various other trial courts in Kerala. Her academic career started in the year 2005. Her area of specialization is human rights law with special emphasis on industrial and labor laws. She has represented NLSIU Bangalore in the government platform, specifically the labor issues of construction workers. Besides that, she has published more than 33 articles in reputed international and national journals and 11 chapters in edited book. With this short intro, I Dr. Anuja to share this technical session, women, migrant workers, and labor rights. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you. Am I audible, Dr. Felix?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now you are audible, ma'am.
So thanks once again to one and all of you there. It's really a homecoming for me. It's my heartfelt privilege to be a part of this esteemed program from one of the best universities, the National Law Universities in India, headed by Professor Dr. V.S. Elizabeth, the Vice Chancellor at TNNLU, Miss Leela, Senior Civil Judge, Registrar. It's really very heartening to be a part of this program and see all of you on the other side of the fence. Shanti, who is running, guiding this particular, specifically the Legal Center for Women's Welfare. Dr. Felix, I have not met you personally. Hi, for the first time we are meeting through this online platform. Deepa, then Golda, and all the other faculty at TNNLU, I cherish all the moments. Thank you once again for making me a part of this esteemed, great program. To talk, let me start with the idea that surrendering myself to the divine. At the onset, this is a very crucial and a very significant topic that has been taken up for discussion in the session 3, technical session 3. The female migrant workers, the interdisciplinary perspective, specifically when it comes to the labor law aspect. That is one of the widest concerns that we have when it comes to the ILO or whether it be a national discourse that is happening. To just flag off some issues, I believe I can take 3 minutes time for that. Whenever we talk about a migrant woman worker, it always comes to our mind the concept of being a helper, a victim, or she might be an illegal person, in the sense, to be very specific on this, because there is the concept of non-documentation or under-documentation. That is where it comes in, and you don't know to which place you belong to. There's a whole lot of journey that you have traversed from the source through the transit to the destination state. That is where the whole problem starts, from the source to the destination, and it continues. As in when we talk about the ILO understandings, ILO, since its backdrop based upon the idea of how to do away with the world wars and to come up with peace, the main idea behind ILO was that labor is not a commodity to be exploited. And naturally, that was the first initiatives taken up by ILO when it comes to the welfare of the laborers. Helping the welfare of helping the workers, promoting the welfare measures of the workers in the colonized territories, etc. And it moved on to specifically the context of receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. ILO was one of the first agencies to receive the Nobel Peace Prize award for its functioning. Moving on to the understandings of globalization, the globalized context, we have moved on a huge lot of distance. We have fathomed a whole lot of distance from globalization to the pandemic and the crisis within the crisis. That's where the difficulty starts, and it opens up a Pandora's box specifically when we talk about the national labor legislations, the piecemeal legislations that we have. Do we have legislations? Yes, we do have. Specifically, do you have one? Yes, in 1979, we do have an Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. But sorry to say, spectacularly, the legislation fails with regard to addressing women migrant issues. And that is one of the maladies coming up as and when we move on to the new labor codes. We don't get to see a clear picture of a woman migrant worker. But true, we do find a whole lot of new improvisations coming up. If the interstate migrant workman was defined as a contractor-driven migration process, now we have moved on to a new setup wherein we say any migrant from a home state, if he or she comes on her own, even though not driven by or not induced by a contractor, you will fall within the ambit or definition of the migrant worker. That is one of the welcoming steps coming up through the new labor codes. As and when we move to the Social Security Code and the Occupational Safety and Health Code, you do find a general statement, yes, women workers are given provided special provisions with regard to occupational safety and health. Clarity has not come up with regard to what you exactly mean by occupational safety and health of a migrant women worker who is totally based upon different kinds of motivations with lesser options and lesser chances for her. And there's a whole lot of trend that exists with regard to why a woman migrates along with the family or on her own. That leads us to the understanding of the patriarchal understandings, why she has always been kept at the secondary position. And again, we are revealing ourselves before the fact that in India, we do have 93% of unorganized workforce, and the remaining 7% comes under the organized workforce. So have we done anything for this 93% unorganized workforce? It's said by NSSO, the sample data reveals that around 80% of the workers are migrant workers. And very interestingly, we are into the world of more of informalization of the formal sector. And to go a step further, I could call it as feminization of migration. We do have a concept of feminization of the labor in the globalized context. But when it comes to this technical session, I would like to put forward and flag off an issue called as feminization of migration, how it unfold itself. What are the ways that we have with us with regard to make sure that, yes, legislation is there, it is implemented properly, and the benefit percolates down to the root levels. Just I will stop with two of my experiences as a teacher, specifically when I was a part of the Building and Other Construction Workers Committee at Bangalore. So it was really an eye-opener session that I had very often with the governmental, sitting across the table with the governmental delegates, talking about the welfare measures of construction workers. And as you all know, construction workers is majorly, in the sense, it comes up from the migrant status, the migrant population, the major chunk of the migrant population that we have. The kind of deliberations that we used to have over there. Very often the regional, the kind of discriminations and the differentiations used to start up from across the table negotiations itself. One of the glaring iniquity that I found out was what is exactly happening at the root level is it was told to me by the Labour Commissioner that, Madam, Interstate Migrant Workmen Act is the least invoked legislation. So think about the idea of we do have a law, but it is the least invoked legislation. So I was wonderstruck. Why is it so? I teach the legislation in the class. Then he said, ma'am, we do have much more different other labor laws to be taken care of. And the compliance measures are too high when it comes to, and it is all about multitasking. We will not be able to look into all these kind of situations wherein the law very ambitiously talk about that there should be coordination between home state and the host state, etc. That means nothing happens at the root level. I was a resource person for Ahmedabad Labour Institute, and I was addressing a group of employers from one of the very famous industries at Ahmedabad. So in the question answer session, one of the employer asked me, I'm just bringing you different perspectives for you to have a food for thought. One of the employees asked me, Madam, if you have a law on interstate migrant workmen, and if you say, as per the law, that every establishment having more than 5 interstate migrant workmen, if we employ them, we should follow the compliance procedures under Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. I said, yes. So you talk about registration and licensing. That means more money is spent from our pockets, right? And what exactly is the incentive for an employer if at all we employ an interstate migrant worker? It took a whole lot of time from my part to tell him that there's a whole lot of vulnerabilities that they are facing when it comes to that they're into very low skilled jobs. They are always undervalued. And I told him, when we look at the profile of a migrant workman, it is all about, they are economically disenfranchised people. They are geographically scattered people. They're politically invisible people. And they are socially disadvantageous too. And when it comes to female workers, migrant workers, they're doubly disadvantaged. She's a female, she's a migrant worker too. Migration itself brings in vulnerabilities. Being a worker, specifically in the context which I talked to you, is highly vulnerable and highly risky. Plus, being a female with all the patriarchal moorings and the settings in the society, the apathy that comes from whether be the government, whether be from the legislature, whether be from the employer's side, creates a whole lot of issues. And that's why I said it opens up a Pandora's box. I believe this will be sufficient as an opening note, wherein I would like to set the tone for the session. I welcome all the paper presenters. I had been through the abstracts. And it was really a wonderful experience when I was going through all the 11 papers. So I believe I can hand over the baton to Dr. Felix for the next proceedings.
Yes, ma'am. So before starting the technical session, so I would like to congratulate the organization team for choosing this topic as a technical session. So for the first time, the government has brought out the national policy on migrant workers. Say they put together by the NITI Aayog. It particularly frames in the considering the issues of women who constitute a significant number. So this shows the need of addressing the issues of women migrant workers and labor rights. So and the contemporary relevance of this session also much needed one. So with this few words, so I just call upon the presenter. So as per the schedule, the first presenter is Shrishti Singh. So the topic on rights of migrant women workers in the garment industry. So the current scenario and the way forward. So I request Shrishti to present her topic. I think she's not in the meeting. So before that, I just want
Dr.
to
Felix, some has some problem in joining in, so you can just go through the next
yes, ma'am.
presenter, then we can ask them to present. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am. So before that, I just want to give some instructions to the presenters. So we have allotted 10 minutes for each presenters, including the question answer session. So out of that 10 minutes, 8 minutes will be allotted to the presentation and 2 minutes will be allotted for the question answer session. So hence I request the student volunteers to send a reminder to the presenter 7th minute of presentation that 1 minute left for the presentation. So otherwise we can't able to start our validity section on time. Okay, so I just check the presenters. So next presenter is Shruti Chaudhary.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Shruti. So the topic is an empirical study on issues faced by women migrant workers in our unorganized sector of our metropolitan cities. So I
Yes.
request you to present that topic.
Okay, thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yes.
Am I visible?
No, you are not visible.
Okay. Now I think I'm visible, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm Stuti Chaudhary. I am pursuing my LLM from Calcutta University in business law. So here now I'm going to present my paper. My paper is on an empirical study on issues faced by women migrant workers in unorganized sectors of metropolitan cities. Overgrowth of population, extreme poverty, and hunger makes a person to leave all the comforts of a life for a small plate of rice and a pinch of salt with family and children. Every year, thousands of women left their villages and come to the cities and join in various sectors to earn for lives. These migrant workers generally prefer those cities where industrialization already has spread its root, and they basically participate in various small and medium scale industries such as printing, stitching, weaving, making of bangles, glass factories, brick making factories, etc. And the unorganized sectors by women migrant workers are firstly, specific skill is not needed. As we know that women migrant workers are generally come in the metropolitan cities from the rural area, and they are not totally educated, because education is the second priority in our list in our country, where poverty gives the most importance. So there they don't acquire special skill for providing better facilities in the organized sectors, and in the unorganized sectors like publishing, printing sectors, they don't need specific skill, so they prefer to join in the unorganized sectors. Secondly, within less time they can earn as much as possible. They generally do work in the restaurants, hotels, and there they can earn a little bit of good amount of money, and after completing their work they can easily transfer from one place to the another place, because they prefer to change their places according to their needs. And thirdly, small and medium sector industries are uprising right now, and they don't have much capital, or they can't offer much to the specific skilled employees. And as we know that the women migrant workers are not specifically skilled, so within a minimum amount of wages they can offer good amount of works. And fourthly, our unorganized sectors are not technology dependent, too much technology dependent, and migrant workers who are generally coming to the urban areas from the rural areas, they are also not too much skilled in the technology sectors. And but in these sectors, the women migrant workers who are coming in these unorganized sectors, they are facing various kind of problems, like firstly, health related issues. Health related issues can be divided into the two sectors: firstly, physical health related issues, and secondly, the psychological health related issues. As they don't get the opportunity to live in a better condition, so hygiene is not well maintained there, so they basically face various health related issues like lung related issues, skin related issues. Even the women workers, they face various kind of problems like pregnancy related issues, even cancer, breast cancers, ovarian cancer, cervic cancers, and they all malnutrition. They always face all these issues because they are not aware of their health conditions, even all the medical treatment which will be available for them. And psychological issues always they face. For that reason, they are not able to adjust with the society at much level what they deserve. Secondly, violence against women, that is the most important factors which they face all the time, that is violence. They domestic violence if they work as a domestic helpers in any home, or other sexual violation, sexual assault, physical assault, harassment at working place. And sometimes they are facing traffic related women trafficking, even they are obliged to perform in the illegal acts which they are not intended to do, but for money they are obliged to do all this kind of works. And thirdly, inequality. India always try to provide equality through its constitutions provisions, but still inequality is the major issue in India. As we all are living in the patriarchal society, they are men and women migrant workers are not treated equally. Even they are not providing securities equally, their financial conditions are not equal, they are not paying equally as men in this in all sectors. And fourthly, social stigma. As we are living in the patriarchal society, and literacy is the main problem in our society, their women are obliged to tolerate all kind of social stigma, which is making their psychological condition worse day by day. But our constitution and our other provisions always try to provide them enough security, like our chapter 3 of our constitution through fundamental rights, through article 14, 16, even article 23, and through chapter 4 directive principles of state policy, various articles have are trying to provide them enough security. Like article 14 always says that equality before law, and article 16 says that equality of opportunity in matter of public employment. Article 41 says that right to work, to education, and to public assistance. Article 42 says that just and human condition of work and maternity relief. Article 43a says about living wages, participating of workers in the management of industries. Everything is providing to them. Even various statutes have been enacted for protecting them, like Equal Remuneration Act 1976, Workmen's Compensation Act 1923, the Payment of Wages Act 1976, the Minimum Wages Act 1948. Even International Labour Organization has provided various provisions to protect them, like providing them good amount of wages, living wages, by restricting the amount of minimum wages for them, by making better conditions for them. They are trying to provide them a better opportunity, and they are trying to protect their life. I have completed an empirical study in Kolkata in the area of Park Street, Rajarhat area. There I have conducted a personal interview. There was kind of 10 questions I asked all the population, and in that empirical study, I got to know that 55% of migrant workers are from the age of 18 to 25 years, 33% are from the below 18 age group, 10% are from 25 to 30 age group, and there is only 1.2% from the above 30 age group. Minimum or maximum of women migrant workers in the unorganized sectors of the Kolkata are facing gender inequality. Maximum of women migrant workers of the unorganized sector face the health related issues, and 27% of women face the issues both related to health and psychology, and 11% of women are facing only psychological issues. Major percentage of women are facing the physical violence in the unorganized sectors. Maximum of women faced sexual violence, which is near about 73%. 46% migrant women workers don't face any kind of social stigma, but near about 54% of women migrant workers face social stigma. 64% of women migrant workers from the unorganized sectors get the payment for their works as wages within the time period, but remaining percentage of women don't get the proper wages within the proper time. Only 22% of women migrant workers of unorganized sector from the population are obliged to provide overtime at working place. Remaining 78% of women are not required to do so. The measures which the government of India has been taken to eradicate these problems with an aim to protect them is actually giving effective protection to 39% people. According to this survey, the effective performance of the NGOs to protect the rights of the women migrant workers and to protect them from several issues which they are facing nowadays are more evident. After completing my study, I would like to put forward some suggestions for making the better conditions of women migrant workers. Like government should make 5 years or 10 years plan with a proper object and list of goals to achieve to eradicate the worst condition of women migrant workers. Secondly, some cooperative fund like systems are needed to make forward to provide them good amount of security after their retirement. Thirdly, some provisions for unorganized sectors should be made for protecting migrant women workers from sexual exploitation, physical violence. Fourthly, government should organize some mandatory free physical and psychological health camp for women migrant workers, which will be easily accessible for them and from where they would be able to do their regular checkup. Fifthly, NGOs which are continuously giving effect to stand beside them, they should involve and motivate more people to support them and stand beside them, because unity is the strength. And Human Rights Department should step forward actively to support them and to resolve various issues of their lives. And lastly, various social media and other way outs should be used to make them enough aware regarding the facilities which they can get from the governments and NGOs, because lack of knowledge, they are less aware regarding all those facilities which they can actually get from the government. Thank you.
Dr. Felix, can I ask question to Stuti? Shanti, am I audible? Can you hear me?
You are audible, ma'am. You are audible. You can
Yes.
go ahead, ma'am. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Deva. Stuti, I have some suggestions for you, Stuti. Are you
Yes,
there?
ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Stuti, your specialization for LLM is?
Business law.
Yeah. So I believe my suggestions will be helpful for you. Stuti, since you have done your empirical study at Park Street, Kolkata, you should have accordingly framed your title to that effect. So you need not tell women migrant workers in unorganized sector. It is known that they belong to the unorganized sector. So if you want, you can have a change in the title, specifically an empirical study on the issues faced by women migrant workers of Park Street, Kolkata, instead of writing metropolitan cities. Stuti, did you get the idea?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
So
okay.
That makes much more sense. And then to fine tune your paper, I believe, since you are a law student, just think about the labor laws that are there in existence and its applicability to female migrant workers. So say, for example, Minimum Wages Act has got a scheduled employment. So whether inclusion within the scheduled employment could be a solution for female migrant workers, or whether many of the work sites wherein migrant workers, females are employed, whether it is included, had they been included in the scheduled employments as notified by Kolkata. That is one area that you can look into, since it is an empirical study. You talked about health specifically, the physical and the psychological one. So one suggestion from my end is, since we were talking about the diseases that the female migrant workers are prone to, just look up at the occupational diseases and occupational hazards point of view from Employees Compensation Act, wherein you will be able to understand whether the kind of diseases that you talked about had been included within the notifiable list of occupational diseases. Then you refer to Workmen's Compensation Act. Please don't refer call that law as Workmen's Compensation Act. Amendment has happened in 2009. It is to be called as Employees Compensation Act. That is the third suggestion which I wanted to bring in. And then I had jotted down some more points. You talked about 4 to 5 suggestions. Stuti, are you able to understand what I'm trying to tell you?
Yes, ma'am.
You had brought in 4 suggestions. I have 2 ideas for you, so that your suggestions will be well taken and well appreciated. You talked about a cooperative fund, right?
Yes.
Just go into the new labor code, Social Security Code, which talks about Social Security Fund. That is one way, a new way of thinking about how can social security benefits be given to the unorganized workers, specifically the migrant workers too. And the other area is, you talked about checkup for the female migrant workers. There is a provision which is coming forth in the OSH code, Occupational Safety and Health Code 2020, which talks about beyond 45, whomsoever is there in a particular industry, they will have to undergo regular health checkup, for which the employer should not be in the sense not attaching any fees or payment, etc. Then as a law student, Stuti, I would like to caution you, there is nothing like Human Rights Department. Either you call it as Human Rights Commission or you can call it as Ministry of Social Welfare and Justice. Could you get the point, Stuti?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So all this fine tuning will enable you to focus more on the idea that you wanted to project. So if it looked like a law paper, right, now it looks like a very general paper. So that is why I thought of giving you some suggestions.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. So, Shruti, so I just want to ask two things. As I said that it is an empirical study. I think you went for a primary data. So, can you say about the sampling method and the sampling size? What is the methodology?
Sorry, sir, you are not audible properly. Your voice is breaking.
Am I audible?
Hello?
Am I
Yes,
audible?
yes, you are audible, Dr. Felix.
Yes. Shruti, I'm asking about the sampling size and sampling methodology. So whether you have selected.
Actually, I make a questionnaire of 10 questions, and I asked them regarding their yes or no, what are they thinking about all these things. Maximum questions was ending questions, like open ending questions, yes or no kind of questions I asked them.
Okay. What is the sample size? How many persons you have interviewed?
I wrote down 10 questions.
Okay. Number of respondent.
Number of respondent. Actually, the actual number of respondent I have forgotten now. I have mentioned that in the paper. The actual number I have forgotten now.
Okay. So my suggestion is, so if you are doing any empirical research, means you have to follow some sampling methodology and sampling procedure. Okay. So other than that, your study is fine. Okay. Also, my suggestion is, if you want to do an empirical study, you can include some other tools. For example, for issuing or for providing the major issues faced by the women migrant workers, you can use Garrett ranking or some other statistical tools. Okay. So it will attract the reviewers also. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Shruti. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay. So I would like to call upon the next presenter. I think it's Deepa Manikam ma'am, who is working as an assistant professor in Tamil Nadu National Law University. So her topic is the interstate women migrant workers in unorganized sector during COVID-19, a detailed study on crimes and legal protection. So I request Ms. Deepa Manikam to present.
Thank you, Felix, sir.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Process of the panel, and good afternoon, everyone. I extend my apologies. I'm really sorry. All of a sudden I got a technical issue in my camera, so I could not turn it on. I'm sorry for that process. So I would like to introduce myself as Deepa Manikam, Assistant Professor, Tamil Nadu National Law University, along with my author, Mr. V. Ravindran, Research Assistant, Legal Center. So I'll be presenting the presentations along with conclusion will be done by my co-author. So I would like to start my presentation. In order to start my presentation, I would like to start with a quotation given by Alexander Crummell. Labor is a fruit of civilization, not the basis of it. So in India, when I say about India's labor market, it's all about informal workforce and insecure employment. And when you also just calculate with the total number of women migrant workers, if you could see it on the screen, you have 90%, over 90% of women in large portion of the unorganized sectors. So in order to explain what is an organized sector includes everything which is not organized, like working at a home or manufacturing sector, garbage collect, or giving childcare or any of the tobacco. The first slide, please. Tobacco industry or any of the manufacturing sector, etc. So I would like to give you the statistic to see it on the screen. 67.93% of women migrant workers are totally there, in the given population, and along with 92% of informal workforce, according to NCEUS, that is National Commission for Enterprises in Unorganized Sector, along with the survey or study done by Periodic Labor Force Survey 2017-18, which stated about the given statistics, that is 45 lakhs of manufacturing sector and 20 lakh women migrant in food processing, tobacco and leather goods, etc. And along with the given numbers. So there's a question when I talk about, just next slide, please. When I talk about women migrant workers, where is the definition of the legislation in a state migrant workers legislation, and it is as done was it is all about being in a contract, whether it is an agreement or other arrangement, without, being that the principal employer is not even aware about how they have been employed, and that leads to so much of inequality. Next slide, please. So when I also just move ahead to the the next topic, which are causes and challenges of migration. So when I talk about causes, I should talk about illustrative economic model given by Todaro, that is on two sector economic model. So basically the prime or emphasis to be laid on the prime pull and push factor for migration, whereas pull factors are as given here, where affluence, safety and freedom drive migrations can be the pull factors, and push factors are generally, as per when you have gender inequality or when you have any discrimination or socio-economic factors are the reasons, like poverty, unemployment, other family movement, and marriages at very young age, etc. In order to substantiate pull and push factor along with the Todaro model, Todaro and Harris propounded this model in 1970, and he says that these are the reasons or the causes for migration: economic incentives, earning differentials, that is probability in getting a job in rural and urban area. So there are two formula being given in the end of the flow chart. So he says that rural urban migration rate, it has been mentioned as M is the rate of rural urban migration, which is equal to function of current urban employment rate and urban rural real income differential and other personal factors. That's what it's been mentioned as W and Z. So the personal factors are like how I just mentioned: marriages at very young age, family movement, inequality, poverty, unhygienic circumstances, other livelihood issues, etc. So this pull factor from metropolitan cities, and having they can earn a lot of money, that can basically wages, that can be the pull factor. So Todaro model can be the economic example or economic model which can substantiate pull and push factor. Just moving to the next, I wanted to talk about the challenges faced by women migrant workers in generally, and also during COVID-19. And COVID-19 I had just mentioned in the next slide. Generally, when I speak about the challenges, these are the very the general challenges that they face, like psychological stress and severe emotional trauma. And as per the Government of India's report of Working Group on Migration 2017, they have so much of health risk, both communicable and non-communicable diseases, and they have sexually transmitted diseases, abnormal vaginal discharge, and all STDs including HIV, syphilis, etc. And they also have occupational health hazards like respiratory problem, lung diseases, allergies, because no one is regulating it. Ultimately it would lead to so much of inequality, and there's no you cannot even say that we are achieving certain level of human rights factors. And moving to next, I would want maybe I'm just waiting for the next slide. Yeah, I'm just getting it. And when I just get the in the slide I have just mentioned it as issues during COVID-19. So I wanted to talk about the unemployment issue firstly, because if you could read it, I have mentioned as Ardha Koita, which is a Marathi term, which says, there's a couple who's hired. We call it as Jodi system or couple system. So they have been called as half the sickle. Now the woman in the the couple, that's husband and wife, if hired, the woman is called as half the sickle, which means all benefits would be given to the male and not to the female, and that's what they call it as half the sickle, which is no benefits, no social security, no accident insurance, nothing being given to the female in the Jodi system. So that's a very serious and severe issue for the unemployment factor in COVID-19. And also, as mentioned by National Human Rights Commission report, it has stated that there's a widespread of violation. Like you can witness all those violations in the pictures that I had seen, spraying of sanitizers, and you can see how people are being ill-treated in there. And when it comes for PDS system, of course they are running just for livelihood. When you do not have one nation, one ration card, you would be really suffering for livelihood, for food. And that's been substantiated in the next slide with the case law, which has been recently passed by the Supreme Court, Injury, Problems and Miseries of Migrant Laborers 2020, where the court stated that non-implementation of the legislation would adversely affect the rights of the migrant workers. And along with it, there's one more case law called as Pradeep Sona versus State of Kerala, where the court had stated it very clearly that the plight of migrant workers is an endless narrative, so which should be regulated very carefully, upholding human rights. And there's one more point where one of the challenges that I would like to mention is about the death of migrant workers returning home, and ministry had submitted it to Lok Sabha. There's a question number mentioned 174. They had stated that no such data is maintained. So this is the severe gross human rights that are getting affected for migrant workers, especially women, where you have sole gender inequality. So this is one of the the chart, the stat that we had created from the data given by taken by indiastat.com. So this is about state-wise number of migrants to return home due to COVID-19 lockdown in India, which shows that they do not have any much livelihood or wages when they come back home. You could see in Uttar Pradesh, you have the very highest number, and you have various states where even the numbers are even zero. And moving next. Yes. So when I talk about crimes against women migrants, I would like to give it to my co-author Ravindran. Ravindran, please go ahead. Thank you, Professor.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will be dealing with the slides on crimes against women. We have divided the crimes against women into three categories. One is the Sumangali system. One of the examples is the Sumangali system, which is practiced in Tamil Nadu. So what exactly is Sumangali system is, there are a few government companies in Tamil Nadu which take the young women and girls from the North India or the Northeast Indias, and they are put in bond for 3 to 5 years. So what happens is, basically they convince the girls or the parents to sign a bond for basically 3 years, and they identifying the women and the girls as the apprentice, not as the production workers. So they also engage them in the night shifts and other long time shifts in the factories, and they deny them the minimum wages which they are entitled to, and they promise a lump sum payment at the conclusion of the contract period that is far lesser than the amount which they are entitled as a daily wage worker, or as a worker who is entitled for the minimum wage. So this has been this particular system has been practiced in many other parts in other terms which are different in nature. So the next crime which we have dealt is with the due to the increase in the rates of the unemployment and the sexual abuses. In during the recent COVID times, we have seen that the number of suicides among the migrant women and the migrant girls have increased. And one such instance is of the example of the state of Odisha, where in the COVID period, within a month, within a span of 1 to 2 months, there have been 19 suicidal deaths among the migrant workers. The next major crime which we can see among the migrant against the migrant woman is the sexual abuses, and there are many such instances which have come to the light in the COVID period, and what Madras High Court has observed in one of its cases that it is very unfortunate to see that the ladies who come to Tamil Nadu crossing hundreds of kilometers are being subjected to sexual assault.
Which is asking good questions, and she's
moving on to the legal protection. The one of the international conventions on migrant workers is the international is known as CMW. So the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan has said the significance of the CMW as follows. She has said that CMW is an important aspect of efforts to prevent exploitation of migrant workers and their families. So the articles which are safeguarding the lives and rights of the migrant workers are as Article 9, Article 10, and Article 16, Clause 2, which directly deal with the lives and protection of the families and the workers. Apart from the international convention, we have our own Constitution of India, which guarantees the rights of the migrant workers. Due to paucity of time, I am not going through all the provisions which are provided in the Constitution. The Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979 is one of the more specific legislation which is for the interstate migrant workers. But unfortunately, as our chairperson for the day, Professor Anuja ma'am said, it is one of the labor legislations which are not properly or not taken into consideration for the proper implementation. So Act 2, the Part 2 of the Act provides the mandates the employers to register with the government to bring in the migrant workers from the other districts. So Section 13, Section 14, and Section 15 also allows the interstate migrants to get the equal payment, displacement allowances, and the home journey allowances, which were denied during the COVID situations. And as Deepa Manikam ma'am said that in the Supreme Court, in the suo motu case which was taken up by the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, the three-judge bench directed all the states and union territories to come up with a list of migrant workers in our country within the 15 days, and to make necessary arrangements to make sure that these migrant workers return to their homelands in 15 days. And it also directed the state governments to drop down the criminal charges which were charged against the migrant workers, and made sure that Indian government makes necessary arrangements to transport the standard migrant workers. Moving on to the suggestions, so one of the most important suggestion which we would like to place on this forum is to properly form and implement the local complaints committee, which is the heart of this sexual prevention of sexual harassment act. So we know that ICC is being implemented in the organized sectors, but in most of the unorganized sectors, the local complaints committee is not being constituted itself. So one of our suggestions is to make sure that the district magistrates visits and carry out surveys in all the unorganized sectors which is under his jurisdictions, and form the necessary local complaints committee which would be under his jurisdiction. The next thing is the government under the Ministry of Labor and Employment and the Women and Children have to launch the media campaigns to raise awareness about the local complaints committee, which is an entitlement of their rights. The next thing is the implementation of immigration policies at all levels of the government by using gender-specific perspective and human rights approach, and addressing the discrimination, exploitation, and violence experienced by human migrant workers is the foremost need of the hour. The next suggestion which we would like to place is instead of stigmatizing, criminalizing, and defining women as women migrant workers as simply the victims, we have to recognize them with humans with the equal rights and agencies who contribute equally to the society as men. The next suggestion is affirming the importance of skill development. We have to make sure that women also play equal role in formulating these schemes, so that they also put forth their ideas which are necessary for the development of women in the unorganized sectors. The most important suggestion which we would like to place is, according to the 2021 report which has been submitted to the Parliament on the crimes against women and children, the NCRB has stated that it is till now not collecting the data against the migrant women workers and the children. So it is a very high time that we recommend the NCRB to start collecting on the crimes against the migrant women workers and the children. So that is all we like to present for this particular paper. We are waiting for your valuable suggestions from the chair and co-chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepa and Mr. Ravindran. Deepa, hi.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
There was
Yes,
a
ma'am,
really
please.
nice flow of thought process was there, starting from definition of interstate migrant workmen to Todaro model to the health inequity concept that you have brought in. Then
Yes,
you
ma'am.
moved on to judicial reflections, I could call it as. Then wherein
Yes,
you
ma'am.
talk about Pradeep Sonar versus state of Kerala and all. So,
Mm.
and you have also effectively come up with the subsistence and the sustenance ideas behind migration. One difference of opinion which I had, or maybe that was my personal
Yes, ma'am.
problem, was that
Yes, ma'am.
will it be feasible for you to bring Sumangali as a crime against women? I was thinking, instead of using the title crimes against women, this is just my suggestion.
Okay, ma'am.
Reflections of
Yes, ma'am,
abuses
please.
against migrant women during pandemic.
Sure,
Reflections of
ma'am.
abuses. That will be much more better, because Sumangali's scheme, to an extent, in those spinning mills of Dindigal, Erode, etc., they consider it as something
Yes,
sacred.
ma'am.
The employers consider it as
True.
sacred.
Yeah, yeah.
But we know the
Yeah,
reality is
yes, ma'am.
something different, wherein it's basically a patriarchal understanding that ties these in a sense, women to that spinning mill, and then after getting that money,
True.
it will enable them to marry and go. It's all about a patriarchal
I know.
understanding that
Okay.
comes up. So better, I believe it can be put as reflection of abuses.
Sure,
Then
ma'am. We'll do it. We'll do it. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
abetment of suicide. I couldn't understand who was abetting that suicide. Do you have any idea on that? Abetment of suicide.
Yes,
What?
ma'am. So basically, yes, ma'am, we had to make it as abatement of suicide based on the sexual abuses being received, because when they really do not have a basic justice and even in their livelihood, no equity. So when you have so much of sexual abuse, it is to an extent to be considered as abetting to suicide.
So you mean to
It is
say
cornering.
reflections of government apathy? Reflections of
Yes,
government
ma'am.
apathy, I
Yeah,
believe so.
yes, ma'am.
Because
Yes,
you were talking about quarantine,
maybe.
and then, right, that's what I felt. So if you can
Yes,
bring
ma'am.
in,
Yes, ma'am. During COVID-19, yes.
better to do away with crimes against women, because that cannot be called as
Sure, ma'am.
specific. And then
We'll take this suggestion.
one
Yes, ma'am.
input for
Please.
you, International
Yes,
Convention
ma'am.
on Migrant Workers and their family members. India has not ratified that convention. So that can be one
Okay.
area wherein you can suggest that it is high time that India should ratify
Not
the
ratified.
convention.
Right. Sure, ma'am.
And then yet another idea that you brought in was
Yes,
rationing
ma'am.
and public distribution system. the coordination that should happen between the home state and the host state. As of now, with the new social security code, a new provision is coming up wherein the migrant worker will be able to get the ration in the place where he's working. Alongside, the
Yes,
members in
ma'am.
the family at the village will be able to get the ration at their home state.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Yes, I
So,
understand it. We'll duly do it in the paper, ma'am.
even though the act has not been notified, the code has not been notified, since that is also a way forward that is coming up in this
Sure,
direction.
ma'am. We'll do that. Yes, ma'am.
Or
We'll
else
take that
everything was
suggestion.
fine, Deepa and Ravindra. Nice job.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Deepa ma'am, and Ravindra sir,
Yes, sir,
so
please.
first of all, I would like to congratulate ma'am. So it's a really nice presentation.
Thank
You
you,
have
sir.
covered the Harris and Dorado model. Also, you have related COVID and the crimes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
One suggestion from my side, ma'am. So actually,
Please, sir.
so if it was possible, you try to find the
Yes, sir.
impact of COVID on the crimes. So whether it has. So usually we say that it is a relationship between the COVID and the crimes. But you need to give the impact. So that means what is the impact in terms of percentage? That is
Okay.
that you have to.
Sure.
So other than that,
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much for the suggestion.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Now I would like to call upon. I think Dr. T. Aparna is not in the meeting. So as well as Ashta Sharma. So she's not also in the meeting. So I would like to call upon Tell Me Jolly. So he's an LLM student from National University of Advanced Legal Studies. Yeah, okay. So the topic is access to healthcare facilities to migrant women. So I welcome Tell Me Jolly to present the topic.
Good evening, everybody. So my name is Telmi, and I'm doing LLM in Constitutional and Administrative Law from Newell's, Kochi. So my topic for the day is critically analyzing the existing legal framework for providing access to healthcare facilities to migrant women in India. So as we all know that there is already an existing hostility against the migrant laborers in India. Like Anuja ma'am said, migrant women, they are doubly disadvantaged. So my paper essentially looks at the existing framework and how it is not advantageous to migrant women and how COVID-19 has further worsened the situation. So the introduction of first part is the introduction where I have dealt with feminization of migration itself, like ma'am said. So I have tried to put a few statistics. One is that as per the 2019 United Nations Department of Economics and Social Affairs International Migration Report, about 47. So initially, India, most of the migrant laborers were men, but because men were considered the provider for the family. Later, women started migrating with men of marriage, and then there was a starting of a single female migration. So the paper analyzes how the so-called feminization of migration happened. What are the reasons for that? How some single female migrations happen due to extreme cases of poverty, how women are tricked into marriages, and as a result of which how they are forced to migrate in search of better living opportunities and things like that. And then coming to the existing legislation, I have tried to analyze two legislation. One is Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008 and the Building and Other Workers Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1996. So the first one, Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008, under that section 3B of the act states that the central government has the right to come up with policies or programs for the welfare of healthcare, to provide healthcare access to migrant workers, especially for migrant women. But to the extent of my research, I have not been able to find any even one healthcare policy that has been implemented for the benefit of migrant women under this act. Then section 10 of the act gives a registration procedure. There has to be self-declaration or documentation to the district administration and so on. So most of the studies, when I've done the study, I could see that most of migrant women are unaware of such a legislation and such registration procedure, because of which they have not registered themselves. So if the Kumbhasam registration process is there, then there are chances that migrant women who are mostly uneducated and who are unaware of their rights would not be able to register themselves under this act. And then section 10(4) of the act states that for some of the social security benefits, that if they have to get, the migrant workers itself have to do some sort of contribution. So these are a few acts that took my interest. So if we see, even this act is section 2(m) of the act also says that unorganized workers are those workers who does not come under certain social security legislation, and they have marked as maternity benefit act. So it is very evident that even under the social security schemes that we give, migrant women are not getting any sort of maternity welfare or healthcare access and all of this under this act. And then coming to the Building and Other Workers Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1996, the section 33 and 34 provides for latrines or urinals and separate accommodation, but they do not specify, the gender has not been specified that there has to be separate. But the rule 243 of the building workers, that rule has come in 1998, that provides for separate urinals and latrines for men and women. Even then, separate accommodation facilities have not been specifically mentioned. So if already there are so many implementation flaws when we come into the executive part, and if the legislature itself misses all these details, then I don't know how implementation will happen properly. So also I could look into a study conducted by Aradhana Dalmia. The title of the study is Strong Women, Weak Bodies, Muted Voices, Women in Construction Workers in Delhi. So it has come in Economic and Political Weekly. So she has taken few interviews of construction workers in Delhi. So most of whom she has interviewed, they said that they're not aware of such existing legislation, maybe because of the cumbersome registration process that is there. So only if that registration process, some leniency is shown, or if the local self-government takes any interest in getting them registered, something can be done about it. So then I've analyzed how this legislation, what are the drawbacks of this legislation. Then coming to the COVID-19 part, I've found a few challenges. One is job insecurity. So most of the women who were working as domestic helps or in construction workers were forced to go back to their home states because of lack of jobs. So when there is no job, there is no money. And then when there is no money, there is no food. So when there is food scarcity, we know it is the women who have to compromise the most. So that will then have long-term health effects on women. Second, a study conducted by Eurasian Geography and Economics, it was stated that in the COVID-19, when women have no money to buy food, there are no chances that they will be able to access, proper sanitary napkins or other medicines for their personal use. And then third, due to lack of jobs, even men started to be at homes, which resulted in overcrowded toilets and very poor sanitation facilities for women. And then due to the COVID-19, we know most of the government hospitals were giving treatments on priority basis. So because of lack of data or lack of language that the migrant workers were using in respective states, they were neglected for treatment. And then the compulsory RT-PCR test, even we know when we had to go to a hospital, they were asking us to do RT-PCR tests for past 42 hours or 48 or 72 hours. So every time a migrant worker is asked to do an RT-PCR test, that itself was very difficult for them. And then increased sexual assault and domestic violence, it's a very prevalent issue. So these are a few challenges when it comes to COVID-19, how it has affected the women. So one positive thing is National Commission for Women had put out an advisory on 7th April 2020, where there were so many very nice gender responsive guidelines, such as providing nutritious food and safe drinking water for women, free supply of nutritious food for especially for lactating women, and then operating controlled rooms near migrant laborer camps, or to provide accommodation and clean sanitation facilities to migrant women, and COVID-19 screening centers, and to provide soap, sanitizers, emergency health treatment, and all of that. There are few guidelines, and it was a very nice advisory. But so many studies, like from the news reports, the Hindu or Times of India have reported that in most of the states, people were not even aware of such an advisory, or the implementation has not happened. So it's very sad. Even though we had such a good advisory that come up in COVID-19, it was not implemented. So coming to the suggestion part, I've put out some suggestions with respect to COVID-19, but two main suggestions that I'd like to tell us. One is India can ratify the International Convention on Protection of Rights of all migrant workers of members of their families in 1990, as well as India can also ratify International Labour Organization Convention on Decent Work for Domestic Workers. So the first convention, Article 23, 25, etc., provides that there will be healthcare services to migrant workers and their families. If that convention is ratified by India, there is a chance that our government will be obligated to make a national law at par with the international standard. And second one is, even though the government is trying to put out new legislation for migrant workers, one of such model was Niti Aayog's national policy on migrant workers, but it is widely criticized for its ignorance towards women, because there has been no mention about the health, sanitation, or reproductive benefits for women. So even if legislation is coming like now in 2020, we have completely ignored migrant women. So I feel the concerns of migrant women are altogether different. So their issues are distinct and diverse. So something that should, even if some legislation is coming, it should give specific reference to migrant women. Common legislation might not benefit them. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Shall I start? Tell me, first of all, I could see a good teacher in you, a future teacher in you. Good way of presenting the ideas. Just let me share with you some of the concerns that you raised about. You talked about basically Unorganized Workers Social Security Act and the Building and Other Construction Workers Act of 1996. So when it comes to Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, the central government will come up with programs or schemes on so and so disability and many other kind of issues have been talked about. So if you can look into the schedule associated attached with UWSSA, you can see the 11 schemes that are provided over there. That are the schemes that is being provided to migrant women workers also. Say for example, Janani Suraksha Yojana, or it could be Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. So these are some of the health-based schemes that are there as per the law, which the law says that these are the schemes available to them. Like you said, registration is important, contribution is also important. And as you said, contribution is one of the difficult areas. When you don't find enough jobs and you are again asked to pay the contribution and then to get the benefits, that becomes doubly disadvantageous. That's for sure. Just for your understanding, you were talking about separate bathrooms with regard to the women construction workers, right? Leave aside separate bathrooms. Have you ever seen toilets in a construction site nearby? We could see many bushes over there, and we could think about how horrible it will be or how terrifying it will be to go in for the nature's call during that particular, in that workplace, right? So when it comes to BWSSA, I'm telling you, the act was passed in 1996. 10 years it took. Only in 2006 the rules came up. Again in 2013, I am reminded of that when I was at National Law School of India, Bengaluru. We were given the circular saying that please do come for the meeting. We will have to finalize on the rules of building and other construction workers. And that is how, with such a long delay, once the act has come up after 10 years plus 4 years, we had to sit with regard to understanding and deliberating on what are the welfare measures for the construction workers. The first obstacle that was whether we need to provide welfare measures to the construction workers within Karnataka, or do we need to extend it outside Karnataka? The unanimous opinion, leaving aside my personal opinion, was no, if it is Karnataka, we should provide only welfare measures to Karnataka people. So that itself was a stumbling block with regard to attitude and perception that the government had and the governmental officers had with regard to how to implement the law. So law is good only as long as its implementation effectively happens. So there had been a long way that we had traversed in Karnataka to come up with the idea of what exactly do we mean by building and other working, the Construction Workers Act in Karnataka and its implementation. We talked about 4 suggestions, like you had suggestions. We said, let there be transit hostels. Let there be residential schools be provided for the construction workers, the children of construction workers. We said there should be a cultural hall or cultural association hall for them. All these were brought in, but the court said there is no need for building another construction welfare board to look into all these things. It will be taken care of by PWD. So it was merely a brick and mortar issue from the governmental perception that we could understand. We were into a much more better, ambitious idea that yes, it will go through and get the green signal, but it didn't happen. And even the Assam Building and Other Construction Workers Board had come over to Karnataka because Bangalore was the model, in the sense, was a trendsetter in this field, but that also didn't happen. So when it comes to implementation, tell me, we get to know as teachers that it's very easy to teach law in the class, in an AC classroom. But when we want to think about reality, how the benefits percolates to the ground levels, it is totally different. And it's too difficult to comprehend also. Rest all was fine. All the best, tell me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Hi. Tell me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So your presentation is overall good. So I think your first part is to analyze the overall availability and accessibility of health services. So we have stated some of the health facilities like healthcare facilities plus accident, emergency. So among that, which is the most one? That means that most vulnerable one, so which is not get to the migrant women.
So the one thing that I commonly found in most of the papers was that during the menstruation, because already there is so much of discrimination against menstruation for even for normal women to ask to their employees. Migrant women, one, they didn't have toilets or anything. They didn't have money to buy sanitary napkins. So anything with related, if they have any issues or any healthcare concerns regarding their reproductive or menstrual health, it was very difficult to talk about it in the first place to their employer or anybody. Also, they didn't have any redressal kind of thing. So that was one. Already, it's a discriminated issue in our country. So for migrant women to come and talk about it was very difficult, I feel.
Okay, tell me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So now I would like to call upon, I think Jayanti is not in the meeting. So Sai Putin, so I would like to call upon Sai Putin Patel to present his presentation on coerced isotony. So a violation of human rights of female migrant women workers in sugarcane industries of Maharashtra. So he is a PhD candidate from Jindal Global Law School.
Yeah,
so
a very good afternoon.
Yes.
A very good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, so am I audible clearly?
Yeah, yes, you're audible.
Yeah. So my paper is titled Coast Hysterectomy, a violation of human rights internationally, with special reference to the migrant workers, especially females, of the sugarcane industries in Maharashtra. So basically the paper flows in 5 limbs, which is the introduction, the literature review, where I try to find a problem. During the literature review, I find a problem that there are not many international statutes relating to the problem of hysterectomy around the globe. So I do an international comparative of the human rights statutes that are available that deal with the menace of hysterectomies as such. Then I move to India and I find that there's a district in Maharashtra, Beed district, where around 50% of the females have conducted hysterectomies, which is coerced in nature and not because of the medical health. So that leads me to discuss this issue. It's exploratory research more than giving suggestions or recommendations. I'm not an expert on human rights to do so. My domain is constitutional law, but I've tried to bring this up that this is such a thing that is happening with female migrant workers in India, which needs to be discussed at such a conference platform with the experts so that India can find something. So first of all, the UN Special Rapporteur has given a definition of forced sterilization, which is hysterectomy, which is the removal of the abdominal and the baby womb of the females so that they cannot conceive, or cutting the veins of the uteruses. So that is what hysterectomy means. So it's a method of medical control of women's fertility without the consent of the woman. So the informed consent is missing over here. There are 4 points that led to this study, which were the basic secondary data that I got. Was 6 lakh American women every year undergo hysterectomy. 75% of them are between 20 to 49 years of age, and it is mostly for financial incentives. So this is the crux point of it, that for the purpose of employment, such hysterectomies are taking place. And India, the sterilization camps have been set up in mainly in the district of Uttar Pradesh, where the informed consent of the females are not taken. As it is, the female literacy ratio is not high. So the informed consent which needs to be taken to do any medical operation on the female, generally the consent is taken from their husbands or their fathers or someone who takes care of the female, or under whose wings the females are. So that's the third point. And the fourth point is that in Uzbekistan, there has been a sterilization certificate that has been asked from people so that they can undertake employment in a particular industry. So these are the things that led to this study. I'll mention 3 literatures briefly that I went through, which was seminal to this issue. First of all, it was by Richard Linde, who explained what the hysterectomy is. And around the globe, it is the second most conducted surgical thing on the body, apart from the cesarean that happens to deliver a baby. Preeti Patel, who did a study on the European Courts of Human Rights, says that the European Courts of Human Rights does not consider hysterectomy as a discrimination against women, the coarse hysterectomy, and which she feels that is a gray area in law across the globe. An Open Society Foundation paper which analyzed the law globally said that there needs to be laws made against hysterectomy, the practice of hysterectomy, and it should be in line with the principles of WHO as well, because this is more than being a human rights issue, it is even a health issue for the females. So the conclusion that was found was the problem is that the practice for money and employment, the hysterectomy should not be for monies and employment, it can be there for the medical grounds. So, delving not much into the international statutes, as we all know, ICCER Article 12 says that informed consent for clinical practices is important. The CEDAW, that is the Convention on Elimination of All Kinds of Discrimination Against Women, in Article 2 and 12 says that such a menace should be the practice that discriminates women and creates certain bodily deformities in them should be eradicated, and there should be legislative interventions to eradicate such practices should be there. Now I move to the case study of Maharashtra, which I have taken, mainly depending on secondary data that is available. So when I wrote this paper, like I started researching on this paper in 2019, start of 2020, in 6 months, there were around 4,605 hysterectomies conducted specifically in the district of Bid in Maharashtra, in which there's a village. The name of the village is Vajanwadi, where there are more than 50% of the females who have conducted hysterectomies on their body. And this is coarse hysterectomy just for the purpose of employment. Now, why does this happen? Why do I say that it is only for the purpose of employment? The reason for saying this is that the employers who are there in that sugarcane industries in the Bid district, where the migrant workers go to work in these sugarcane fields, they have been paid rupees 1.5 lakhs in cash, the females, so that they can work all the year and they should not take menstrual or maternity breaks, and hence they are forced to go into hysterectomy. Now 1.5 lakh rupees is 500 rupees a day for a female, which is a very, very hefty amount for the migrant workers. So the money that is involved takes away their bargaining power in this. Apart from that, this was realized by the Maharashtra government, and the chief secretary moved a motion that immediately action should be taken against it. A committee was formed by the Maharashtra government, but nothing at the end happened and nothing came out of it. So now this has been considered as a norm. I've quoted a saying of a human rights worker in Maharashtra who says that you will hardly find women with wombs in these villages. These are villages of wombless women. More than 50% of the women in this village do not have their homes just because they have to migrate from one village to another to work in the sugarcane factories, which want them to be without womb so that they cannot take maternity or menstrual breaks. So coming to the conclusion very fast, it says that my conclusion is that the informed consent, first of all, should be available to the females. They should be informed like what are the consequences on their body of this, and whether they should be doing it. If there's a medical emergency, obviously there should be an exception to it. We need to concretize these international instruments into the domestic law, as everyone else has said here. and to create a deterrence on this practice where the employers force these females to undergo hysterectomy practices so that they can be employed in particular industries. So those are my broad conclusion, and the basic conclusion or presenting this paper, the basic crux of the matter is that to bring it to the table and have a discussion around the post-hysterectomy, which I feel is a neglected issue, which I didn't hear of much. So that was the sole purpose of coming and presenting this paper, so that there's a broad discourse and discussion around it. Open to questions.
Yes, Saifuddin Patel.
Yeah.
That is a nice presentation.
Thank you so much.
And may I know your topic for PhD?
It's on judicial It's on judicial accountability. I'm a master in constitutional law, so it's on judicial accountability in the Supreme Court of India.
Good to hear that somebody's master in constitutional law.
Rare.
Nice. Even we say we are students of law. That's all. Nice to meet a master, first of all. Okay, take it in a lighter mode. One area which I thought that you could have or you can focus specifically, narrow down from the general level to the main level is what I was thinking is specifically female migrant workers. So if you can concentrate on special rapporteur on migrant workers.
Yeah, that's the quote I've mentioned in the start of the paper. There's a quote.
Yes. Is it from special rapporteur on migrant workers? Yes. Okay. So give more importance to the general ideas that has been brought in, the tendency of the world, the global tendency with regard to this issue specifically. Then from there, if you move on to IC, the International Convention on Protection of Rights of Migrant Workmen, which and their families, which India has not ratified.
Yes.
Just try to check up. Do you have anything on this in that? I have
mentioned
not
in the
seen
paper again. Mentioned in the paper again.
Yes, I have not seen anything in that with regard to this. But that's a good area that you can research upon. Very good. Then you have a 2006 multilateral agreement on, I believe, a plan of action. It is one of the ILO's main important plan of action. 2006 multilateral framework on labor migration.
I see.
Because that is considered to be one of the most important instruments, which includes a gender framework with regard to labor migration governance framework. Okay. So if it is possible for you, whether it has been addressed over there, from my limited knowledge, it has not been. But how can you include that also, if that is the idea behind? That is one area that you can look into. And issue was really good. But my personal opinion is you can again narrow it down to only female migrant workers. That gives a much more ideas with regard to how you bring in interdisciplinary ideas into specifically a labor issue. Because when you talk about female migrant workers, being a female is a difficulty, being a migrant worker is a difficulty, moving on from home state to reaching to host state, everything is a whole lot of what do you mean by the kind of difficulties that they undergo throughout their life and then going back. So all these, I just want you to just narrow down, that's all.
Yeah. Thank you so much
all
for
the
comments.
best.
Thank you so much for your comments.
Good afternoon, Saifuddin.
Good afternoon, Dr. Felix.
So your study is somewhat novel. So I'm also happy to say that. So being an agriculture economist, so you have touched the topic of sugarcane industries also. So can I know that? So which state is having the higher number of hysterectomy?
Presently, it's Maharashtra.
Okay, so I think it's Andhra Pradesh, but it is based on the sugarcane industry. It is Maharashtra, right? Okay. So have you come across the NFHS survey? That is National Family Health Survey.
No.
So that is a secondary data. So that you can able to get they covered those things. That is hysterectomy. So all the family related issues, health issues. So they have covered those things. So if you are well versed in some of the GIS mapping or some other thing, so you can use this that data also. That is a National Family Health Survey, which has happened during the year 2015-16. Okay, so you can use that for your study purposes. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Felix. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now I would like to call upon Harshita Kumari, student, Department of History, Delhi University. So her topic is on historical tragedy of legislative legal disabilities for female migrant workers, a case study of sex workers. So I request Harshita to present the topic.
I hope I'm audible enough.
Yeah, you are.
Yes.
So this paper will be presented by myself, Anne-Marie Shaju, and my friend Harshita. We'll be simultaneously using the terms prostitute and sex worker, and it's not to undermine the labor work, but then it's just to show the prejudices the word has been given by the society throughout the years. Also, we are sharing our paper in the chat box, so if anybody wants to go through our paper, can just go through it. So to start with the paper, as we all know, macroeconomics is required for understanding the larger economic growth of the country. But many a times it denies the unorganized sector, and in our paper it would be the migrant laborers. And when the legislative policies are being made, it's mainly based on the male migrant workers. And the denial of female migrant workers is due to majorly two reasons. One being that the labor of female is being undervalued, and the other, the migration is seen as something of out of marriage and never out of labor when it comes to female. So another thing that we are pointing out in our paper is the nature of states, which works on the principle of Napoleon states idea of disciplining. And by this, it disables the rights of many citizens, and the main targets of this is the marginalized sections. And here it would be the female migrant workers. So we have used the case study of sex workers as the microcosm to the larger female migrant worker for our studies. And we have used both primary and secondary sources, and we were really fortunate enough to interview Ms. Nalini Jamila for the same. So moving on to the part law and society, this section traces the legislation brought against the sex worker, sometimes to protect her, sometimes to protect from her. So while we analyze the nature of state towards the migrant workers, to just point out a law, that's the Criminal Tribes Act that came. So by which the state tried to deny movement of tribes, and it criminalized the whole migrant laborers. At that point, it would be the wandering tribes, and reinforced the idea of they found wandering tribes as a threat to the society, and reinforced sedentary lifestyle onto them. So as Rohit notes, there were three phases of legal engagement with prostitution during the time of colonial India, and it would be regulationist, anti-trafficking, and abolitionist in nature. And as Durba Mitra points out, making of the prostitution was a result of collaboration between the colonial state and the upper caste Bengali Bhadralok, which codified the Hindu upper caste monogamous marriage as an oath, and anything that was seen deviant to this was criminalized. So here it would be prostitution. So while even when we move on to the independent India, the idea towards prostitution was seen like the nature of acts that were coming up after during the independent India time. It's something one can trace from the Victorian. It had the trace of Victorian morality in it, and also it was something that can be traced like a protectionist to a paternalistic one. So while her body continues to circulate as the site of legislation, reform, and moral discourse, her personhood was being denied throughout. So when the state took the character of paternalistic character in its nature, what it did was it completely denied the presence of a female agency for sex workers in it. So from here, my friend Harshita will be continuing.
Hello. Thank you, ma'am. While all citizens are equal before the law, some are more equal than others. Anne has highlighted the legislative discourse which sort of disabled the sex worker throughout these years. I'll be talking about the judgments that follow. Judges are limited by constitution and statute limitations, but the liberal interpretation in their own right paves way for enrichment of rights, which has been evident over the years in Supreme Court judgments, which has expanded the extent of rights available to our citizens. With respect to sex workers, there are 4 articles that are of consideration. Article 14, which deals with equality before law. Article 19, which enlists 6 freedoms available to all citizens of India. Article 21, which deals with right to life and personal liberty. And Article 23, which is an which criminalizes begari law and slavery. While the logic of Constitution created Article 23 with respect to Begar law also, but also primarily by keeping the sex worker as its subject, because it defined a certain kind of woman who was based on the prototype of the upper class woman, and the femininity that this upper class woman imbibed became the femininity that should be dominant for all women across, thereby homogenizing the multiple feminities and ideas of womanhood that existed in our country with one singular narrative. Clearly, that sort of constitutional elitism obviated agency of other women that coexisted in our country. Clearly, then, as a result, sex workers also have been victims of a penalizing nature of judicial narrative that shares the social hysteria of the immoral prostitute and continues them denying of agency. We see that there are certain interesting cases over here which we would have liked to discuss in presence of more time, but given the paucity of time, I think I'll just summarize what these cases sort of suggest. The fact that sex workers have constantly went ahead and contested legislation that impinges on their right to work, whether that is the anti-trafficking laws or other legislations which aim at removing them from public spaces, we think that is itself an evidence that sex workers identify themselves as a collectivity rather than an atomized unit, and therefore are working towards a certain degree of cohesion in their understanding of work, and are reaching out to the judiciary for this very similar recognition. However, judiciary in its judgment always tends to atomize this identity and makes them in a minority, and thereby allows this discourse to prevail that it's okay to take away their rights or abridge their rights in the public interest. We think such an idea that a public morality is prioritized over the rights of these women again comes from that same monolith of the chaste upper caste women that we have imbibed, but also because it's this colonial legacy which upholds a Victorian morality and sees it as the morality that should be guiding all women in a society. I think a fourth and a very important idea that we come across in both judicial and legislative discourse is the fact that trafficking and sex work are often conflated into one, which implies that women who enter sex work and are victims of trafficking are put in the same category as women who join sex work because of abject poverty. There are obviously understanding that abject poverty is itself a certain kind of coercion, albeit a socio-economic coercion, but it is that same kind of coercion which pushes a woman to work day and night as a maid in someone's house, and the same kind of coercion that pushes them to work in in any kind of brick and kill industry. However, most women, based on our case studies, who joined sex work came actually earlier from let's say something more respectable like being a domestic help or working in a casual labor industry. But the choice between the two was ultimately decided by the tactical fact that sex work does indeed offer a better remuneration as compared to other industries for these women. Despite the fact that it obviously comes with more harm and more exploitation than perhaps other industries do. Figures about migrant workers are from 2001 census, but as Deepa ma'am's data in the beginning of this session shows that there has been an exponential rise in number of migrant workers since then. Clearly, then there is a need to bring about a gender-sensitive legislation. We note that the exploitative appropriation of labor power, gross underpayment, unfavorable work environment, and psychological trauma characteristic of all female sex workers' life is characteristic of all female migrant workers' life. Clearly, then, a gender-sensitive policy is the binding need of the hour. With respect to sex workers particularly, we have 4 way forwards that I think are of concern. We think there's an integral need to break from this colonial legacy. We think that the idea of rehabilitation needs to be institutionalized response rather than a reactive response to isolated incidents, which basically means the idea that instead of when a case comes over and then there's a social pressure to respond reactively and rehabilitate women, the states need to understand by constantly rehabilitating women, it resubjects them to the psychological trauma and puts them in a survival mode every time these women are uprooted from one environment and placed into a new environment. And therefore, rehabilitation project needs to be a collaborative project between stakeholders, which here being sex workers beside the civil society, rather than a coercive project, which imprints the violence of state rather than a dialogue with state. Finally, we think that during COVID-19, sex workers clearly have faced further marginalization and have been pushed to the periphery. And in that context, NHRC's recognition of sex workers as a worker is a welcome step. However, the implication of this is that while our project was a small aim at gendered analysis of this segment of migrant workers, we think that upcoming papers should also focus on the other marginalized sexualities and identities that are constantly at the receiving end of any kind of legislative policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshita, and who was the other one? Anne Mary, right? Definitely, both of you are to be appreciated for coming up with an interdisciplinary paper. It had contents from history. Naturally, the major part was history, the historical trajectory. It had the human rights component. It had the humanitarian touch. It had the ideas regarding how women workers get into sex work. And obviously, we all know it is given to understand that it is the third, the most prominent industry that is being, in the sense, that's flourishing in the world after arms, ammunition, and drug trafficking, the trafficking in labor. So this is where Jan Bremen talks about the newest forms of bonded labor. So when the concept of migration and the migration of women happens, it moves on to a level wherein new forms of bonded labor happens. Bonded labor legislation is there. We do have a law that prohibits bonded labor, but it was basically linked with agrarian bondage. So now you have brought in that idea with regard to that there is something beyond that. The newer forms of bonded labor is being reflected through this paper. To that extent, I'm very happy about it. Just one question. You referred to Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India, right? So please do write us Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India. That's one of the most famous cases which we can't compromise as a law student. Okay, so Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India. Can you tell me why that case was used in your presentation? In which context?
Ma'am, we had argued about that case because prior to the Maneka Gandhi case, Article 21 had a very reductive reading in the sense that it was just that state does not have the right to take life. But post that case, it became a very elaborated idea with multiple components being coming in: the right to education, right to privacy, and this.
So you wanted to bring in the fair play component, right?
Yes,
just and fair play component. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. And just that the fact that everyone has a fair right to employment and remuneration, and given the nature of the state, everyone should be allowed to resort to that.
Yes. You had a point on judiciary and paternalism. Did you have any case on that? Any example on that?
Yes.
Which case, wherein the judiciary has that reflection, brought in that reflection of paternalism? I was curious to know about it.
Ma'am, just 1 minute, if you'll allow me a minute. That was the Sharma Bai versus case in 1956 and the Kaushalya case of 1958. These are two cases when this, in fact, even the 2004 Gujarat case, I'm just forgetting the petitioner's name.
That's fine.
But those cases, my judiciary actively says that we are restituting you, we are rehabilitating you. And these women say that we do not want that restitution rehabilitation, but the judiciary says that that is the right cause of freedom for you. So I think in that context, the judiciary actively negated any kind of agency on behalf of these women.
Do you have any other alternative for rehabilitation by the government?
Yes, ma'am. Anne, would you like to comment on that? Ma'am, Anne would like to comment on that.
Yeah. So I.
Oh, yeah. I believe now you are audible. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So with regards to rehabilitation idea, while we were interviewing Ms. Nalini Jamila, what she mentioned was like, see, the idea of rehabilitation is required. Like rehabilitation is required, but first of all, the state should understand and distinguish between what is sex trafficking and what is sex work. So until and unless that distinguishing idea isn't there, whatever the state does in the name of rehabilitation would be just taking away the rights of the sex
Rights of
worker.
yeah.
Yeah. So what she mentioned was that like right now sex workers do have associations, and what they do is so when they see a person who is being trafficked, first what they do is they counsel them. They counsel them and ask if they want to continue in sex work or want to take up some other job. So only after that counseling section, and once they feel like okay, this is something that they want to do, it's only then they are like asked to like come back to this work. Otherwise, there is no force on them. So like what like the states can do thereby is like like and right now the state function with this morality idea. So not by enforcing that, but just by having like a proper counseling session, understanding this. And
Yes.
the other thing that she mentioned was, is the idea clear?
That's fine. That's fine. 1 second, Dr. Felix. I could call it as one moment.
Ma'am, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, Harshita.
So ma'am, in our interview with, can you just mute it?
Okay. Yeah.
So ma'am, in our interview with, ma'am, just a sorry, ma'am. Actually, we're in the same room, so it keeps on echoing. So we just wanted to add that Nalini mentioned about the Calicut model where orphanages have been doubling up as daycare centers for sex workers. We think that is one approach. We think that community mobilization rather than forced rehabilitation is the way out of,
Community mobilization, yes. Just to look into legislate your title. I'm just talking about your title. Historical trajectory of legislative / legal disabilities for female migrant workers. It sounds slightly jarring. Legislative and legal disabilities. So what you can do you, as far as I have understood, you're talking about a transformational process from female migrant workers to sex workers, right? So if you can make it historical trajectory of a transformative process from female migrant workers to sex workers, a case study, it makes much more better sense. Legislative and legal disabilities is highly jarring over there. So just check up. That's only suggestion.
Thank
Rest
you, ma'am.
all the best. It was a nice presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Please, Dr. Felix. Sorry.
Yes. No issues, ma'am. So Harshita and Anne-Marie, so nothing from my side to share. So except congratulating you both. So ma'am said that you have touched the history law. So also I just want to say that you have also touched some more economics in that topic. So yeah, congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So now I would like to call upon Dr. T. Aparna, Associate Professor, PG College of Law, Osmania University. So her topic is on issues of migrant women workers in unorganized sector in India. So I request Dr. T. Aparna to share the presentation.
Are we running out of time, Dr. Felix? Mute.
I think this is the last presentation, ma'am,
Okay.
Dr. T. Aparna.
Because I have been
Yeah.
fully interfering with the timings that you had already set. Sorry for that.
Yes, ma'am. No issues, ma'am. I think Dr. T. Aparna is in the meeting, but I don't know if she's not responding. Some student volunteer can check whether she's in the meeting or not. Dr. T. Aparna. Or is there anybody to present? Or we left someone with the presentation? So I think Leena Bhattacharya is not in the meeting. Mandip is also not in the meeting. Jayanti, Ashta is not in the meeting. Ma'am, Shanti
Yes.
ma'am?
I believe Shanti is not there.
So Nidish, sir?
Ma'am, I'm here, very much here.
Yeah.
Listening. Ma'am, I've just posted in the group. Let her respond. Maybe we can wait
Yes.
for another couple of minutes. If we are
Oh,
not
sure.
able to reach her, then you can just go and wind up the session.
Yeah, sure, Shanti.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Maybe meanwhile, I'll just congratulate all the participants. This is one session out of the 4 which I really enjoyed listening. I was like constantly listening to all the papers because labor, human rights, women is something very close to my heart personally. So and very very sensible papers. I really liked each one of yours, the methodology which you have done, the problem you have found was so very, very novel, like how Dr. Felix was pointing out at one presenter. Thank you so much for all the inputs. Definitely, in one of the sessions, Dr. Rose Verghese was instructing us, or I could say suggesting us to write some recommendations to the Law Commission.
Yes.
Maybe we'll seriously think of it, and especially all your research is going to give us a scientific method to give some kind of an input with regard to any or all the social issues what the women migrant workers are facing. And thank you so much, all of you.
Shanti, Dr. Felix, Golda, Deepa, Nidish. Nidish, hi Nidish. Thank you so much.
Hi, ma'am.
Fine. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and then listening and tolerating us throughout for the session. Just to wind up, all the papers were wonderful, and all these paper again resonates the same truth and same fact. The quote by Arundhati Roy, wherein she says there is no really such thing as voiceless. It is rather deliberately silenced or preferably unheard. So let's make a new move towards resilient economies and societies wherein we can have a voice given to all these kind of suppressed voices and let them be represented and be fulfilling with regard to the idea of no one shall be left behind, the motto behind Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. Thank you so much for inviting me and making me part of this program.
Thank you, madam. So I would like to conclude the session formally. Ma'am, may I?
Sure, Thomas. Dr. Felix.
Okay.
Maybe Shanti will have to give the permission then.
Yeah. So I would like to thank all the presenters and the participants who have joined this conference from all over India. So I am certain that every presenter has presented their work. Okay. So I sincerely hope that through your presentation and discussion, so afterwards, all of us can contribute to solve the issues of migrant labor workers issues. So finally, I would like to thank all the committee members for organizing this conference and ensuring that it proceeds smoothly. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, chairs, and thank you all the participants. It was our pleasure indeed to listen to all of you. It was a very informative session. And I think both the chairs were so passionate about the subject, so it was even more interesting. I'm happy that I was here and listened to all of your words of wisdom on it. Thank you so much. It was indeed a very good session. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Nitish. Thank you, Dr. Felix.
Thank you,
Bye.
ma'am. Thank you.
We'll meet again. Bye-bye.
Sure, ma'am.
Thank you, Shanti. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Anuja. Thank you, Dr. Felix. Thank you, all the participants. Meet you all at the valedictory. I request everyone to be present at the valedictory.
Bye, Shanti.
Bye-bye.